Everyone saw him fall behind. Nobody saw him build. That is the Sigma male story in one sentence. Early on, he looks like the man who did not make it. He is not moving at the pace others expected. He is not hitting the milestones the people around him are hitting. He is not accumulating the visible markers of progress that his environment uses to measure a man's worth. And so the verdict comes early. He is behind. He missed his window. He is not the one to watch. They stopped watching. That was their mistake, because what looked like falling behind was something else entirely. It was construction happening below the surface. It was a foundation being laid so deep and so solid that when it finally broke through, and it always breaks through, there was nothing anyone could do to close the gap. Not because they stopped trying, because what he built during those quiet years cannot be replicated quickly. It cannot be rushed. It cannot be copied by men who skipped the process that produced it. This video is about that process. 7 points. Stay with me. Welcome to Silent Wise. Subscribe if this is where you belong. Let's go. 1. He gets left behind because refuses to move at someone else's pace. The first reason the Sigma male appears to fall behind early is the most misunderstood one. It is not that he lacks the capability to move faster. It is not that he missed opportunities the others caught. It is that he made a deliberate decision, consciously or instinctively, to move at a pace that serves his actual development rather than a pace that satisfies other people's timelines for what his life should look like. And in a world that has very specific, very visible, very socially enforced ideas about when a man should reach certain milestones, choosing your own pace looks indistinguishable from falling behind to anyone watching from the outside. Society runs on comparative timelines. By this age, you should have this. By this point in your career, you should be here. By now, you should have these things, these relationships, these markers of progress. These timelines were not designed for any specific man. They were average across populations, filtered through social norms, and handed down as standards that feel objective but are entirely constructed. And the man who accepts them without examination hands control of his own development timeline to a system that has no knowledge of his specific situation, his specific goals, or the specific kind of man he is trying to become. The Sigma male examines them. He looks at the socially prescribed timeline and he asks the question most men never ask: whose life does this timeline actually serve? Not his career goals, not his specific developmental needs, not the particular path he has chosen. Someone else's idea of what a life in sequence looks like. And having asked the question honestly, he makes a different choice. He moves at the pace his actual development requires. If that means slower visible progress in the early years because he is building foundations that do not show on the surface yet, he accepts that cost. If it means appearing to fall behind peers who are optimizing for visible milestones rather than durable foundations, he accepts that too. What he does not accept is the anxiety of comparison. He does not allow other people's pace to become evidence that his own pace is wrong. He has separated his assessment of his own progress from the social comparison that most men use as their primary measuring tool. He knows what he is building and approximately how long it will take. The people who are running past him on the visible metrics are running a different race on a different track toward a different destination. He is not behind them. He is on a different road entirely, and that road leads somewhere they will not reach by running faster on theirs. 2. He gets left behind because he invests where returns are invisible. The investments the Sigma male makes in his early years are almost entirely invisible to the people around him. He is not investing in things that produce immediate visible returns. He is not buying the markers of success that signal to the social environment that he is progressing. He is investing in himself, in his skills, his knowledge, his mental framework, his discipline, his physical and psychological capacity. These investments produce nothing that can be seen on a surface level for a long time. And in a world where visible progress is the primary metric by which men are assessed, investing where nothing is visible looks identical to not investing at all. The man who buys the car, the apartment, the wardrobe, the lifestyle that signals success to his social environment is making investments in visibility, and visibility produces immediate social returns, recognition, approval, a place in the hierarchy, a particular kind of confidence that comes from being seen as someone who is doing well. These returns are real in the short term. They feel good. They provide the social feedback that most men are calibrated to need. but they are built on assets that depreciate. The car loses value immediately. The lifestyle requires constant income to maintain. The social position built on visible markers requires continuous performance to sustain. It is expensive infrastructure with a short shelf life. The Sigma male is building different infrastructure. Skills do not depreciate. Knowledge compounds. Discipline, once installed as a genuine operating system, runs at low maintenance cost and produces high output indefinitely. Mental clarity, built through years of honest self-examination and deliberate development, becomes more valuable with time rather than less. Physical capacity developed through sustained commitment becomes a baseline that colors every area of life. These are investments whose return curve starts nearly flat and then bends upward sharply after a threshold is crossed. For years, they appear to produce nothing. Then they produce everything. The people who watched the Sigma male in his early years and saw a man who was not progressing were looking at the wrong metrics. They were measuring visible markers and finding none. They were not measuring the invisible accumulation of compounding assets that were building beneath the surface of anything they could see. By the time those assets produce visible returns, they have been compounding long enough that the returns are not just good. They are structurally disproportionate to anything that could have been built through the visible marker approach, and there is no shortcut to replicating them because the compound growth required years of time that cannot be manufactured. 3. He gets left behind because he chooses depth over speed. There is a trade-off that operates invisibly in the development of every man, though almost no one names it explicitly. The trade-off between depth and speed. A man can move quickly through many things, gathering surface-level competence across a broad range of areas, producing the kind of varied, generalist capability that looks impressive from the outside and generates early momentum. Or he can move slowly through fewer things, going deeper than most people bother to go, developing a level of genuine mastery that takes far longer to produce, but that operates at a categorically different level than anything built through rapid surface-level acquisition. The Sigma male chooses depth, not because speed is inherently wrong, but because he has identified what he is trying to build, and he has understood that what he is trying to build requires depth that speed cannot produce. He wants to understand things at a level that most men never reach. He wants skills that hold up under the most demanding conditions, not skills that perform well in easy ones. He wants judgment that comes from genuine understanding, rather than pattern matching on limited experience. All of this requires going deeper than is comfortable, staying with difficulty longer than most men will, and resisting the pull toward the next thing before the current thing has been genuinely understood. In the early years, this produces a man who appears limited in range. While other men are adding to their visible portfolio of achievements and capabilities, he is still working on the same things he was working on before, still developing the same skills, still going deeper into the same domains, still asking harder questions about things most men accepted the easy answer to and moved on from. He looks narrow. He looks slow. He looks like he is not diversifying in the way that successful people diversify. And this reads, from the outside, as a man who is not making the moves he should be making. What is actually happening is a depth of development that will eventually produce a level of capability that cannot be faked and cannot be quickly replicated. The man who goes deep enough in anything builds something that surface-level speed cannot touch. Not because deep knowledge is magically superior in all situations, but because the depth of genuine understanding produces a quality of output, a resilience under pressure, and a capacity for continued development that shallow acquisitions simply cannot match. The gap between deep and fast does not show early. It becomes impossible to miss later. 4. He gets left behind because he does not play the social game. A significant portion of early professional and social advancement has almost nothing to do with capability. It has to do with the social game, the management of perception, the cultivation of the right relationships through the right performances, the navigation of hierarchies and politics and unspoken rules about who needs to be seen with whom and what kind of visibility generates the kind of attention that translates into opportunity. Men who are good at this game advance faster in the early stages than men who are more capable but less socially strategic. This is not cynicism. It is an accurate description of how most environments actually work in the early stages of a man's development. The Sigma male does not play this game. Not primarily because he cannot. Many Sigma males are perceptive enough to see the game clearly and skilled enough to play it if they chose to, but because the game requires a kind of self-presentation that is incompatible with the internal work he is doing. The social game requires you to present a polished, strategically positioned version of yourself to the environment at all times. It requires constant monitoring of how you are being perceived and continuous adjustment of your presentation to maintain the desired image. It is a full-time performance job on top of whatever actual work you are supposed to be doing. The Sigma male is not willing to pay that cost because he understands what it would take from the actual work. Every hour spent managing perception is an hour not spent building real capability. Every unit of energy going into strategic self-presentation is a unit not going into genuine development. He has done the calculation and decided that the early advancement the social game produces is not worth the cost in real development that playing it requires. He will accept the slower early progress that comes from not playing it in exchange for the deeper and more durable development that the freed-up resources allow him to pursue. The result in the short term is that he appears to be left behind by men who are less capable but more strategically visible. He is, in the short term, what those men built on social strategy requires continuous performance to maintain. What he built on genuine capability requires only continued work to develop. One is high-maintenance infrastructure built on perception. The other is low-maintenance infrastructure built on reality. Reality, over time, always becomes the dominant variable. 5. The shift happens when depth meets opportunity. There is a specific moment in the Sigma male's timeline that changes everything. It does not happen on a schedule. It does not arrive at a predictable point that he can plan for with precision. But it is as close to inevitable as anything in human development gets, for the simple reason that it is the natural result of the compounding process he has been running for years. The moment when the depth he has built intersects with an opportunity or a condition that demands exactly what he has spent years quietly developing. And when that intersection occurs, the gap between him and the men who moved faster but built less deeply becomes visible for the first time. This intersection can take many forms. An industry shift that suddenly makes his particular depth of expertise highly valuable when it was previously overlooked. A challenge that requires exactly the kind of judgment and resilience he developed through years on the hard path. A window of opportunity that most men cannot capitalize on because they lack the foundation he quietly spent years building. Whatever the specific form, the structure is the same. The environment suddenly demands something that he has and that the faster, shallower builders do not. And the gap that was invisible when things were easy becomes impossible to miss when things require more than surface-level capability can provide. What makes this moment so significant is not just what it reveals about where he is. It is what it reveals about where the comparison was always wrong. The men who were ahead on metrics that the moment of real demand does not recognize. Visible milestone accumulation, social positioning, the early career advancement produced by the social game. These things matter in environments where demand is low and perception is the primary currency. When the environment shifts and demand rises, and real capability becomes the dominant variable, the accounting changes entirely. Suddenly the man who appeared behind is the man who has what the moment requires. And the men who appeared ahead are discovering that what they built was sized for the easy conditions that no longer exist. The Sigma male did not plan for this moment specifically. He planned for the principle that genuine depth of development produces value that eventually cannot be ignored. The specific moment of intersection was always going to arrive in some form. He simply had to be ready when it did. And he was ready because he never stopped building during the years when being ready seemed irrelevant. 6. He becomes the standard because he built what cannot be quickly copied. When the Sigma male's development becomes visible, when the results of his quiet years of building break the surface in a way that cannot be rationalized away or dismissed, the men around him face a specific and uncomfortable problem. They can see what he has produced. They can observe how he operates. They can study the surface of what he does and attempt to understand how he does it. But they cannot quickly replicate the foundation that produces it, because the foundation was not built in months, it was built in years. And those years cannot be compressed regardless of how much effort or intelligence is applied to the project of catching up. This is the structural reason he becomes the standard nobody can reach. Not because he is uniquely gifted in a way that forecloses the possibility of replication, but because the process that produced him is fundamentally time-dependent. The compound growth of real skill over years, the judgment built through sustained experience with difficulty and failure, the discipline installed as a genuine operating system through years of non-negotiable daily execution, the depth of self-knowledge developed through extended honest self-examination. None of these things can be fast-tracked. They require the one resource that cannot be purchased, borrowed, or manufactured: time. Specifically, time spent doing the actual work of development, without shortcuts and without the kind of cutting corners that produces apparent progress while leaving the foundation weak. The men who want to close the gap face a version of the same choice the Sigma male faced years ago. They can pursue depth, go back to the foundation, do the actual work, accept the years of apparent stagnation that genuine development requires. Or they can pursue the appearance of his level, study his surface outputs, replicate his visible behaviors, produce the performance of his standard without the underlying substance. The second option is faster and almost universally chosen, and it produces a version of his approach that works until it is tested by the same conditions that forged the original, at which point the absence of the real foundation becomes apparent. He does not need to defend his standard or protect it from imitation. The foundation defends itself simply by being what it is. You cannot fake years of real development. You cannot perform depth that does not exist under pressure. The standard he has become is defined not by his visible outputs, but by the invisible infrastructure that produces them. And that infrastructure is, for all practical purposes, unreachable by anyone who did not begin building it when he did. 7. The men who left him behind eventually measure themselves against him. This is the point that nobody who dismissed the Sigma male early anticipated. The men who were ahead of him, the ones whose faster pace and visible early progress defined what success looked like in the environment they shared, eventually find themselves in the position of measuring their own progress against the man they once considered behind. Not because he sought that outcome, not because he engineered a reversal designed for maximum dramatic effect, but because the compounding of genuine development over time, sustained consistently through the years when nobody was watching, eventually produces outcomes that become the reference point for everyone in the environment. This reversal carries a particular quality that pure achievement alone does not. It is not just that he surpassed them in some measurable way. It is that the surpassing happened from behind, in silence, without the social drama of visible competition. He was not racing them. He was not even watching them particularly carefully. He was building. And the building continued at the same pace and with the same consistency after the reversal as it did before, because his motivation was never connected to where they were. It was connected to where he was going. The reversal is not the destination for him. It is simply a marker that becomes visible to others as the compounding continues. For the men who once moved past him, this moment produces something worth examining honestly. Some of them recalibrate. They look at the trajectory he ran and understand for the first time what the early years were actually for, and they adjust how they think about their own development going forward. These men learn something valuable, even if it arrived late. Others cannot do this. Their identity is too entangled with having been ahead, with the early progress being the evidence of their value, to absorb the recalibration without defensiveness. They find explanations for the divergence that do not require them to examine the choices they made in the early years, when everything seemed to be going their way. The Sigma male does not require either response from them. He did not build for their eventual acknowledgement any more than he built against their early dismissal. He built because building was what he chose to do with the time and capacity available to him. The verdict of the early years was never the verdict that mattered. It was always the long one. And the long verdict does not arrive quickly. It arrives accurately, and it is written entirely by what was built, not by what was said about what was being built while the building was happening. 7 points. 7 layers of one of the most important truths about how real development actually works, not the way it looks in the early stages, but the way it lands in the long ones. He got left behind because he refused someone else's pace, because he invested where returns were invisible, because he chose depth over speed, because he refused the social game. And then the shift came. Depth met opportunity, and everything the years of quiet building had produced became impossible to ignore. He became the standard because what he built cannot be quickly copied. And the men who once moved past him eventually found themselves measuring their own progress against the man they stopped watching years ago. The timeline was never wrong. The early verdict was never accurate. The appearance of being left behind was never the reality of what was happening. It was the surface reading of a process that only makes sense when you see the whole arc. And the whole arc only becomes visible to people who stayed patient enough to watch it complete. If you are in the early part of that arc right now, if you are the man who looks behind, who is not hitting the milestones others are hitting, who is building something that the people around you cannot yet see, understand what that actually means. It does not mean you are losing. It means you are in the part of the process that most men never survive long enough to get through. Stay in it. The arc completes. It always completes for the man who does not stop building. This is silent wise. Share this with one man who needs to hear that being left behind early is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of the real one. Subscribe, stay on the path, more is coming. And before you go, one question. Are you measuring your progress against someone else's timeline or against the only one that actually matters, your own? Sit with that. This is silent wise. Stay silent, stay building, stay dangerous.